Do you have an epoxy tabletop project coming up, or maybe you've just been thinking about doing one? You've probably noticed that there's a lot of epoxy products out on the market and you might be overwhelmed by all the options. In this video, I'm going to talk about a couple of the brands I've used, and I'm going to go over some of the pros and cons of using each. So if you want to find out which epoxy is best, stick around. Hey everybody, I'm Seth with Stuff Seth Makes, and I just finished up another batch of tabletops. And these tabletops are very similar to ones I had done in the past, but on this batch I changed up one thing, and that one thing was the brand of epoxy that I used. Now, I want to make it clear that this isn't a sponsored post. I just want to share my experience with you so that maybe it'll help you when it comes time for you to do a pour of your own. For those of you that follow me on Instagram, you know that over the last couple years I've done a lot of epoxy tabletops. And I think I'm up to about 120-ish, right around there by now. And if you don't follow me on Instagram, I've done a lot of epoxy tabletops. For the first 110 or so of those tabletops, I use this product called Famowood Glazecoat. Back when I did the very first order of tabletops, I was a little intimidated because I had never used an epoxy product before, but the 1-to-1 mixing ratio made it pretty hard to mess up. So I would take the part A and the part B, mix them together and stir it up for a few minutes, and then pour it over the tabletop, spread it around with the spreader, and then torch out all the little bubbles. And I've been doing 3 coats. Usually the first coat is like 1/3 of the full recommended amount, and I use that as a skim coat. And I use that to go over and kind of fill some cracks and voids and the knots in the wood. And then I'll follow up with a full recommended amount flood coat, let that cure for a day or so, and then come back with the next flood coat and just repeat the process like that for every table. Fast forward to my current batch of tabletops. These are going to be used on an outdoor patio area of a restaurant, so I needed something with some UV protection since the Famowood Glazecoat has none. So I searched around a bit and I kept coming back to TotalBoat. Now, I'd already known that the TotalBoat brand existed and I had seen people using it on Instagram for various things, but for some reason I just thought that it was way out of my price range, because I mean, $59 for the Famowood Glazecoat with free shipping on Amazon, I mean, that's pretty hard to beat. But when I was looking at it and I saw that the TotalBoat gallon was only 66 bucks plus free shipping as well, I figured for that price it was worth giving it a try. And so I calculated that I needed 3 gallons for this project. So I ordered a 2-gallon kit and the 1-gallon kit. And what's interesting is that if you need to buy the 2-gallon kit, you're basically going to pay the same price for buying a 2-gallon kit of TotalBoat versus 2 1-gallon kits of the Famowood. The whole process for each different brand is pretty similar. You've got your 1-to-1 mix ratio, you stir it, you pour it, you spread it, you torch out all the little bubbles. But here are some of the major differences I found between the TotalBoat and the Famowood. The Famowood directions say to stir the mixture for about 6 minutes and then pour it into a new mixing cup, stir for another 6 minutes before pouring it onto your project surface. The TotalBoat, however, says to mix it for about 3 to 5 minutes before pouring it onto your surface. It doesn't say anything about mixing it, then pouring it into a new mixing cup, then mixing it again, then pouring it out onto the surface. I will say, however, that we found 7 minutes was a good mix time for these, because after about 5 minutes, the mixture was still a little cloudy and I wanted to make sure that we could get it as clear as we could before pouring it onto the tables. So right off the bat, TotalBoat is saving me a little bit of time, and I'm saving money by not having to buy a bunch of extra mixing containers. The consistency of the TotalBoat seems to be a little bit thicker than the Famowood. And with all the tabletops that we've done in the past, we've noticed that the Famowood Glazecoat product was a little bit thinner, a little bit more runny. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but for any of you who have experience pouring epoxy, you'll know that that stuff is going to find its way into the most invisible holes and nooks and crannies. And the thinner viscosity of the Famowood kind of made that a real hassle to deal with. Now, don't get me wrong, the TotalBoat also had its fair share of issues with nooks and crannies and all that, but I think overall it was thicker and it just gave me less of a hard time than the thinner Famowood. Setup and cure time. Now this is a big one. The Famowood takes several hours before it can get to the safe to touch it without leaving your fingerprints in it level of dryness. And I'd do probably 1 coat per day. And even after that, I wouldn't even say it was 100% non-tacky, but it was good enough to where you could touch it and start on your second coat. I was really surprised after pouring the TotalBoat that it was only about 4 or 5 hours till I could slide my hand across and not leave a mark. It felt dry and smooth, and it was ready for the next coat, so that means I could get 2 coats in one day. One of the reasons why I said the setup and cure time was so important is because the quicker it's setting up, the less time there is for things like dust and flies, whatever, to land in the epoxy when it's curing. I have a room down at the end of the house where we do all of these epoxy projects, and it's kind of like the cleanest room in my house. We do the epoxy pours down in that area of the house, and even still, it's not like it's science lab clean. Tiny particles of dust and whatever are still floating around the room. There's nothing we can do about that. But it's nice to have that shorter setup time, as opposed to the Famowood with that longer setup time and it taking longer to cure. We would come out the next day and there'd be like little specks of dust, maybe a hair, sometimes a spider somehow got into it. And obviously a faster cure time is good because being able to do 2 coats in one day means the job gets done faster. And I really wish that I would have had this feature back when I did the original 84 tables. The smell of epoxy, we know it all too well. If you've worked with any chemicals on a project, you know there's gonna be some smell, and epoxy is no different. When stirring and pouring the Famowood, we can notice a pretty heavy odor, and in fact, my father-in-law is affected by it so much that he can't even be in the room. Or maybe he's just trying to get out of working. But anyways, my wife, she can smell it pretty strongly, and me, well, I've got probably one of the worst smellers in the world, and even I can smell it pretty strongly. When we started stirring and pouring the TotalBoat, it wasn't until a couple tables in that we were like, hey, does this stuff not smell as bad as the other stuff? And we agreed. It's still a chemical process, so it's gonna have some smell, but my wife and I agreed that it's just not quite as strong as the Famowood. We would still recommend opening windows while you're working on it, and I would even recommend getting one of those 3M dust masks, but the gray ones that are specifically for paints and fumes. And I'll have a link in the description so that you can get your own. Epoxy pouring over tabletops like this are great options for restaurant tables because once the epoxy is cured, it's basically like a layer of plastic over it, and since the restaurants are always wiping and cleaning the surfaces, it holds up really well. One thing we noticed when doing the previous tabletops with Famowood is that if you had an item that had any sort of weight to it and you put it on the tabletop, it would leave like an indentation after a while. For instance, let's say you put this box of Famowood Glazecoat on a table for a few days. When you take it off, it might leave an indentation in the same shape of the box. And at first we kind of freaked out about it and we're like, oh no, it's ruined. But then I realized a little later that it popped back into shape. So it's kind of like morphed itself back. This also happened when we stacked and leaned the tables against the wall after we finished each one. We would move one and we would see a mark where the previous one was resting. But then again, after a little while, it just kind of popped back out and looked like it never happened. I saw somewhere online that this can actually happen, so I'm not really that concerned about it. And now that we've used the TotalBoat product, I feel like the TotalBoat cures a little bit harder than the Famowood. Now we've put a couple items on the tables that have the TotalBoat and we haven't noticed any indentation. Now maybe the items weren't heavy enough or maybe we didn't leave them on for long enough yet. It seems like it's harder, and I tap on the tables with my fingernail and it seems like it's a pretty hard plastic. The UV protection will be interesting to see play out because these tables are going to be outside, but from what I understand there will be a shade sale or something similar, and the tables are going to be taken in and out during business hours. From what I could find, a completely outdoor UV proof exterior epoxy doesn't exist, but the UV protective qualities of the TotalBoat are going to help with the yellowing. And the Famowood Glazecoat doesn't have any UV protective, so we'll see how it goes. If you've got any recommendations for an exterior outdoor proof epoxy product that works well, let me know about it in the comments below. I would love to look into it and maybe try it out. So here's a quick recap of everything we've talked about. The Famowood stirring time is about 12 minutes, and the directions recommend pouring it into a second mixing cup after the first 6 minutes, while the TotalBoat is about a 7-minute stir time using only 1 mixing cup. The Famowood consistency seems thinner and more runny than the TotalBoat, which depending on your particular project, you may prefer one or the other. We found the curing time, or at least the safe to touch time, to take longer with the Famowood at about 8+ hours, while we found the TotalBoat safe to touch time to be about 4 to 5 hours. The Famowood has a stronger odor than the TotalBoat, to us anyway, so if you've got a sensitive smeller, keep that in mind. Once cured, we found the TotalBoat product seemed to be harder and most like a plastic surface out of the two brands. The TotalBoat product does have some UV protection. How it will hold up we'll have to see, but the Famowood has none. As of the time I'm doing this video, the Famowood gallon is $59.74 with free shipping on Amazon, while the TotalBoat gallon is $64.99 with free shipping on Amazon. And of course, I'll have links to both of those in the description below. So now the question, which epoxy is best? Well, I found that in my shop, the projects I'm doing and the way I'm using the epoxy, I've got to go with TotalBoat. And that's not to say that Famowood Glazecoat isn't a good product. Obviously, I've done tons of tabletops with them and they've all come out great. But I just feel that in my situation, the TotalBoat is the right fit for me. What you may want to do is actually pick up a quart size of each of them and run your own comparison. And then that way you can see which one you're more comfortable with, which one you like better, and which one just kind of works better in your particular project. I hope you guys found this video to be helpful. I would love for you to give me a thumbs up on the video, and I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel. If you guys have any questions or feedback or suggestions, anything, leave a comment below and let me know. Also, if you guys feel like giving me a thumbs down, that's cool too. Just leave me a comment telling me why. That way I can improve on the next one. If you want to see my rustic wood table projects, you can click this link down here to go to that playlist. If you want to see just the epoxy pouring part, you can click this link and that'll take you to that video. I'm also going to have links in the description to all the different products I use for the epoxy pours. I'm also going to have links to my website, blog, and Instagram. I would love to have you over there as well. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate your time, and I'll see you on the next one.